So, you're probably as intrigued as we are by all the buzz around The Conjuring, Last Rites, right? Especially if you've, followed the other films.
Oh, absolutely.
It really gets you thinking, doesn't it? Like, what's the real story behind those terrifying supernatural tales?
Yeah, exactly. These films, they really tap into something primal, that sort of fascination with the unexplained. And, well, with this new movie focusing on the Smurl Haunting, it feels like a great time to dig into the source material we have, which looks at ghost phenomena, but, through a scientific lens.
Okay, so forget the jump scares for a minute.
For a bit, yeah. We're going to explore why science finds the whole idea of ghosts. Well, let's just say it presents some pretty significant challenges.
Right, so the Conjuring universe, it's all built on the case files of Ed and Lorraine Warren, these self-proclaimed paranormal investigators.
It's the premise.
And that first film really set the scene, didn't it? Classic haunted house stuff, claims of demonic possession, really intense.
And now we've got The Conjuring, Last Rites, on the horizon. September 5th, 2025, I think?
Yeah, that's the date.
And it's set to tackle the Smurl Haunting, Pennsylvania, right? Supposedly happened over a long stretch, like 74 to 89. But the film's apparently honing in on 1986. So, yeah, for fans of the genre, it's definitely one people are watching out for.
But, okay, hold on a second. While these stories are, super gripping on screen, our source material really suggests we should approach the real-life cases with a healthy dose of skepticism.
A very healthy dose.
So when we talk about a scientific perspective,
Yeah.
where does the whole idea of ghosts really start to kind of fall apart?
Well, the first major sticking point really comes down to evidence. Specifically, the scientific need for reproducibility.
Okay, reproducibility. Explain that a bit.
So think about it like this. In science, if you claim something, say, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius at sea level, other scientists anywhere should be able to test that.
Right, under the same conditions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Same conditions, and they should get pretty much the same result. It's all about independent verification, being able to check the work.
Okay, got it. So how does that apply to ghosts? Like seeing apparitions, things moving, hearing voices. Has science ever managed to consistently replicate that in a lab?
Not really, no. Despite, honestly, tons of investigations over many, many years, these kinds of phenomena, they've just never been reliably reproduced in controlled scientific settings.
Never.
Not reliably, no. There's this field, parapsychology, which specifically tries to study this stuff, ghosts, ESP, you name it, using scientific methods.
Right, I've heard of that.
But honestly, it hasn't really produced robust, peer-reviewed findings that consistently stand up to rigorous scientific scrutiny.
So, okay, instead of capturing a ghost on camera under lab conditions, what usually happens when scientists actually investigate these claims, like in a supposedly haunted house?
Well, what often happens is they find natural explanations, things that might seem supernatural at first glance, often turn out to be, well, misinterpretations of perfectly normal things.
Like what?
Drafts, weird noises from pipes, maybe even deliberate hoaxes in some cases. And another big one is suggestibility, how easily our perceptions can be influenced.
Oh, right. So this lack of repeatable evidence, that sounds like a pretty big hurdle for the ghost theory.
It's significant, yeah.
What about, like, the basic rules of the universe? Our source material mentioned physics.
That's right. Our current understanding of physics, both the classical stuff like Newton's laws, gravity, and even the weirder quantum physics. Neither framework really has a place for, disembodied consciousness or these ghostly energy forms you hear about in stories and see in movies. There's no model for it.
So, wait, if a ghost is supposedly, I don't know, throwing a book across the room or making a noise, that would need energy, wouldn't it?
Precisely. You've hit on a key point. That brings us straight to the conservation of energy.
Okay,
Yeah.
Remind me.
It's a fundamental principle. Basically, energy can't just appear out of nowhere or disappear into nothing. It can only change form, like electrical energy becoming light and heat in a bulb.
Right.
So, if ghosts were real and could interact with our physical world, move things, make sounds, cause cold spots, they'd need an energy source, a measurable one.
And we haven't found one.
And so far, science hasn't detected any such energy source connected to these alleged phenomena.
Okay, what about those classic ghost story things, like you walk into a room and suddenly it's freezing cold in one spot? Thermodynamics.
All right, the cold spots. Yeah, our source material mentions thermodynamics.
Yeah.
And while, look, a sudden cold patch definitely feels eerie.
It really does.
It absolutely does. But it's usually explained much more simply. Often it's just air currents, like a draft you didn't notice, or even how different materials in a room hold on to heat differently.
So it's not a ghost sucking the heat out.
Thermodynamics, which is all about heat and energy transfer, doesn't really support that idea. There's no known physical mechanism for a ghost to just pull heat from one specific spot like that. It's more mundane usually. Think of opening a fridge door. The cold isn't created, heat is just moved away.
Okay, so physics doesn't seem to offer much support. What about what's going on inside our own heads? Our source material talked about neuroscience and psychology.
Yes. And this is where things get really fascinating, I think. Because we do have some compelling explanations for experiences people sometimes label as ghostly. Our brains are amazing interpreters, but sometimes
They glitch.
well, not exactly glitch, but they can create unusual sensations and perceptions based on various states or stimuli.
Okay, like what? Give me some examples.
Okay, well, take sleep paralysis. Ever heard of it?
Vaguely. It sounds, not fun.
It's generally not fun, no.
Yeah.
It's that state where you're kind of waking up or falling asleep. You're conscious, but you temporarily can't move.
Yeah.
And a lot of people who experience this also report really vivid hallucinations. Often seeing a shadowy figure or feeling this intense presence in the room, maybe pressure on their chest.
Wow. Okay, that sounds genuinely terrifying.
It can be very scary, yes.
Yeah.
But it's a known neurological phenomena. It shows how our brain can generate these incredibly real feeling presences and visions.
Right. Purely internally. What?
Well, there's also work involving the temporal lobe. That's a part of the brain involved in processing senses, memory, language.
Okay.
And interestingly, some studies using mild electrical stimulation on the temporal lobe have, in some patients, induced sensations. Things like visual or auditory hallucinations, or even just a strong feeling that someone else is nearby.
When no one is there?
When absolutely no one is there. So yeah, sometimes our own brain activity can generate experiences that feel external or, otherworldly.
That's wild. So it's not always something out there.
Often it seems not. And then there's something called pareidolia.
Pareidolia, I think I know this one. Seeing faces and things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Seeing faces in clouds, or the man in the moon, or maybe a pattern in wood grain that looks like an animal. It's our brain's tendency, a very human tendency, to find familiar patterns, especially faces, even in random or ambiguous shapes.
Okay.
So imagine you're in a dark, maybe slightly creepy place. Your brain might be hyper alert, more likely to interpret shadows or dust motes or curtain folds as, a face or a figure.
I can definitely relate to that. I've probably seen a dozen faces in my bedroom curtains over the years, especially as a kid. What else can our minds sort of play tricks on us with?
Well, memory itself is a big one. Our memories aren't like video recordings, right? They're not perfect playbacks.
No, they definitely change.
They're reconstructive. Every time we recall something, we're kind of rebuilding it. And especially when we're feeling strong emotions like fear or stress, our memories can become less accurate. Details can get fuzzy, maybe exaggerated. So if someone believes they had a ghostly encounter, their memory of that event might subtly shift over time, maybe becoming more dramatic or more ghostly to fit that belief.
And I guess the power of suggestion must be huge too, right? Like if you go to a place that everyone says is haunted.
Oh, absolutely huge. Expectancy and suggestibility are incredibly powerful psychological forces.
How so?
Well, if you walk into an old building already convinced it's haunted, you're basically primed. You're far more likely to pay attention to every little creak, every shadow, every cold breeze.
And interpret it as paranormal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You interpret ambiguous stimuli as confirmation of what you already expect or believe. Your mind is almost actively looking for the ghosts.
Okay, so it's not just about our individual experiences, but maybe the whole cultural context we live in. Our source material mentioned anthropology and sociology.
Precisely. That's a really important layer. The very idea of what a ghost is, what it does, why it might stick around that's not universal. It varies hugely across different cultures and different time periods.
Right, so ghost stories change depending on where and when they're told.
They absolutely do. Ghost stories often act like a mirror, reflecting the specific social beliefs, the anxieties, the moral codes of the society telling them.
So like in a culture obsessed with justice, you might get more stories about vengeful spirits seeking retribution.
Exactly that kind of thing. You see themes of unresolved trauma, guilt, warnings, the need for proper burial rites, fears about death itself. All these things resonate differently in different societies.
Huh.
And it's also interesting, that cultures with really strong, deeply ingrained traditions of believing in ghosts, they often report more sightings.
Which doesn't necessarily mean more ghosts are actually there.
Probably not. It's more likely a result of social reinforcement. People are taught to believe, they expect to see things, they interpret ambiguous events through that supernatural lens, and then they share those stories, reinforcing the belief within the community.
That's fascinating. It makes you wonder how much of what we think of as ghostly is really a kind of shared cultural story we tell ourselves.
It's a powerful factor.
Now, our source also mentions some more maybe practical explanations. Things like technology and environment.
Yes, definitely. Sometimes there are surprisingly mundane reasons behind things that seem really strange or inexplicable at first.
Okay, like what?
Well, take infrasound. Heard of that?
Low frequency sound, right. Below what we can hear.
Exactly. Very low frequency sound waves. Humans can't consciously hear them, but some studies suggest that exposure to certain infrasound frequencies can actually induce feelings of, like, anxiety, unease, chills.
Really?
Yeah. And even, in some people, a sense of presence or visual distortions. Stuff that feels very spooky.
So that creepy, unsettling feeling you sometimes get in an old building might not be a ghost, but just weird vibrations in the air.
It's a definite possibility in some cases, yeah. Another one, quite serious, is carbon monoxide poisoning.
Ah, the silent killer.
Indeed. And even low levels of CO exposure, not necessarily lethal, can cause symptoms like headaches, dizziness, confusion, feelings of dread, and even auditory or visual hallucinations.
Wow, that could easily be mistaken for something paranormal if you didn't know.
Absolutely, it's happened. It's genuinely frightening, but in a very non-supernatural way.
Totally. What about electromagnetic fields? EMF. I always hear ghost hunters talking about EMF meters.
Right, EMF is a big topic in ghost hunting circles. The idea is that high levels of electromagnetic field might somehow trigger sensations in the brain, maybe feelings of being watched, paranoia, fear.
Is there anything to that?
Well, it's been explored, particularly within parapsychology. Some researchers, like Michael Persinger, did work suggesting EMF could stimulate the temporal lobes and cause these sensations.
Oh.
However,
What?
the scientific evidence definitively linking ambient EMF levels, the kind you might find in a house, to genuine ghost experiences. It's still pretty debated. It's not something widely accepted by the mainstream scientific community as a primary cause. The effects seem inconsistent and hard to replicate reliably.
Okay, so another area where the evidence is shaky.
Pretty much, yes.
All right, so we've covered quite a bit here. The lack of solid, repeatable scientific evidence, the clash with fundamental physics like energy conservation, how our own brains can create convincing illusions through things like sleep paralysis or pareidolia.
The influence of cultural beliefs and expectations, and even environmental factors like infrasound or CO.
So pulling it all together, what's the overall scientific conclusion about ghosts? Where does science stand today?
Well, from a rigorous scientific standpoint, the concept of ghosts, as typically understood, really lacks. Well, it lacks testable hypotheses. You can't easily design a repeatable experiment to prove or disprove their existence in a way that would satisfy the scientific method.
No way to reliably summon one on demand for study.
Exactly. And critically, we have this growing list of potential natural explanations. Explanations rooted in established fields like neurology, physics, psychology, environmental science, that can account for a huge range of experiences people attribute to the supernatural.
So they remain unverified.
They remain unverified through controlled observation and experimentation, which are really the cornerstones of science.
So, okay. While movies like The Conjuring are, fantastic thrill rides and great storytelling,
Absolutely entertaining.
they exist firmly in the realm of fiction, not scientific reality.
That's the scientific perspective, yes. The idea of ghosts as discarnate spirits interacting with our world, it remains outside the scope of established science. Unless, some truly robust, empirical, verifiable evidence emerges,
Which hasn't happened yet.
which so far simply isn't there.
Okay. So, as we look forward to maybe getting spooked by The Conjuring, last rites, it's definitely worth remembering the scientific perspective, why these stories are so compelling to us, but also how different they are from our current understanding of the natural world.
Absolutely. Our deep dive today, it really touched on physics, neuroscience, psychology, even cultural anthropology, all offering these fascinating insights into why we might perceive things or believe in things beyond the tangible.
It really does make you think, doesn't it? Maybe here's a final thought for you to consider. How much does our own, perhaps very human, desire to believe in something more, something beyond the everyday, influence how we interpret those strange noises or weird feelings?
That's a good question.
And what does the enduring popularity of ghost stories across so many cultures and times really tell us about our own psychology, maybe our collective fears and anxieties as societies?
That's definitely something to mull over long after the movie credits roll.